right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our SayoStudio Science podcast. We talk about science, science communication, and science art. And we are so excited today to have you here with us, Ted. This is Ted Bergin. He is an astrophysicist from the University of Michigan. He searches for chemical clues to life in far off solar systems, but he's also devoted to promoting science understanding. We've had the pleasure of illustrating his research of water and carbon in early solar systems for a journal article soon to be published. And with that, we can start talking. So, Ted, thank you. As I don't know if you know, but you're our first scientist guest. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Uh,
That's a pleasure.
yeah. And so part of that is part of the reason we wanted to have you here is because part of what we love to do is hear the excitement and enthusiasm from researchers who are actually getting the science done.
Hmm.
And so your work is so exciting. Um, so I have a really basic question to get us started. So I introduced you as an astrophysicist. That's what I've seen listed in your bios. Um, it almost seems like you're more of an astrochemist. I don't know. What do you call yourself?
Yeah, strictly speaking, I'm an astrochemist with a small c. Uh, so, so I'm an astronomer who does chemistry, and the chemistry part I taught myself. And it's a wonderful time to be doing this kind of science because there's so many observational opportunities to push back the boundaries.
So why is that? Is it new development in technology
It's
or?
there's two things. About a decade ago, $1 billion observatory called the Atacama Large Millimeter Array
Hmm.
started operations, and with ALMA, that's
Hmm.
what it's called, we can actually start to resolve uh, planet systems information. In general, we can, when I say resolve, that is, we can sort of peer into the giant planet forming zone, sort of where Jupiter and Saturn are in our solar system, and study the
Hmm.
chemical content of the material out of which planets are born, and then compare that to the chemical content of planets that are out there that we're detecting right now, extrasolar planets,
Uh-huh.
or planets in our own solar system. And then, of course, more recently, Christmas 2 or 3 years ago, I guess it's 3 years ago, the James Webb Space Telescope
Hmm.
launched. And with James Webb, we're able to look into where the terrestrial planets, the Earth like planets, are being born. And so
Oh,
now we
okay.
have the full suite. We can study planet formation and planets themselves writ large and try to
Uh-huh.
understand how planets are constructed.
That is so exciting, and I didn't realize that Alma was that young. I thought it had been around longer. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it's a little over a decade.
mhm. And uh, I guess I'm curious. So when we're talking about these, the large, what is it? The large millimeter array. I have that
Mhm,
right, right?
mhm,
So a lot of times we kind of call them telescopes, but they're not necessarily telescopes in the way that we think of as, like pretty
mhm.
beautiful visible light spectrum. Like what kind of data do you get out of these?
No, that's a very good point. So what I'm looking at is the molecular content of regions. So you
Okay.
can think about like water.
Hmm.
If you understand how the Earth, how water got on the Earth and got into comets and so on and so forth, you would want to observe water out there in space in other systems. And the way that you do that is through the molecules themselves. They're either rotating, they're spinning, and they spin, they
Oh.
bang into each other, they gain energy, and then they lose that energy and release a photon of light. And that process is quantized such that it comes out in a very specific part of the spectrum of light. And what we
Hmm.
do is we tune our telescopes. This is in the radio, or in the case of James Webb, the what's called the mid-infrared part of the spectrum of light.
Uh-huh.
We tune our telescopes to the frequencies or wavelengths where water is emitting, carbon dioxide is emitting, and we can observe their emissions, measure the temperature of the gas that is doing that emission. We can measure the content as well
Mhm.
so that we can do the chemistry. And this is called
So
spectroscopy, is what
okay.
that's called.
And that's pretty incredible to think about that you're able to tell the signals of molecules that,
Yeah, you
like,
can pick
from
specific
like, in
ones.
galaxies away.
Yeah, so
That's,
so what I do is just a, the stuff that we call nearby. Uh,
mhm.
that's 100 parsecs, 200 parsecs, and 1 parsec is 3.26, or basically 3 light years. And
Okay,
a
thank
light
you for
year
that.
is the distance of time it takes light to
Uh-huh.
travel in 1 year, or the distance light travels in 1 year. And so that's what I'm doing. But you can observe molecules all over the place. So we observe molecules in comets, planets, galaxies, all the way
Mhm.
out to the beginnings of the universe.
Wow. So maybe a really basic question, but because I think of everything really visually, of course, in the line of work I'm in. The data that you're physically looking at looks like graphs. Is
Yeah,
that
so it's two things with the Atacama array.
Mhm.
We actually get maps, if you will.
Okay.
So if the say the water content or whatever molecule I'm looking at varies within my image, I would get a map of the distribution of the emission of water, which may relate to where the water is physically located in that object,
Okay.
or it may relate to that the excitation conditions, the thing that causes the water molecule to gain energy and then release that energy, is best matched at that particular location. So then I have to try and disentangle that and understand
Oh.
that. Okay, so that's one thing. And James Webb also does the same thing, just with a different methodology. That also can take images, and each pixel will have its own spectrum, so that each pixel will
Okay.
have a measure of the water or wherever that you can try to map. Now, many of the regions we don't actually resolve. So with James Webb, typically I'm not resolving water when I see it, and
Okay.
that's just because of when the terrestrial planets are born so close to the star that it's very hard for us to take pictures that spatially resolve that. So you get the idea of spatial resolution, right? If I take a picture with my iPhone camera of an object that's 10 feet away and it has a person in it, I resolve that person. If that person is
Mhm.
100, 200, 300, 400, 500 yards away, I do not resolve that person at some point in my image. Okay.
Okay.
And so with James Webb, often we're not spatially resolving uh, where the emission is coming from, but in some instances we are. And with
Mhm.
ALMA, generally we actually are spatially resolving things.
Okay.
Okay.
So with that description, I guess what something that I've run into is sometimes people are a little confused why we need um, illustrations of astronomy subjects. So I think
Mhm.
all of your descriptions was really helpful because there's so much research and data that is understandable to you who understands the science, but it's not a beautiful, Hubble telescope image.
Yeah,
Is that an accurate what do you think?
I think yeah, you've hit there's two aspects to that. One
Mhm.
aspect is you are correct. With Hubble and with Webb as well, you could take these gorgeous pictures. In fact,
Mhm.
many of the pictures that you get from Hubble and Webb are of regions where stars are being born actively. They're regions of star formation. There's lots of structure
Mhm.
that happens and that gets lit up when stars are born, and that a lot of those gorgeous pictures come from that. And so you could use that picture as an illustration, right? But then when you
Mhm.
don't spatially resolve where you're looking at it, then you have to make an artist's illustration of that.
Mhm.
Alternately, you may want to uh, describe some physical effect. How is something occurring? And
Mhm.
for me, I often work on the microscopic scale. Sort of the scale of
Yeah.
you know 10 to the minus 10 centimeters, 10 to the minus 13 centimeters, and then you're going all the way up to the scale of where planets are
Yes.
being born, which is 10 to the 13th centimeters. That's
Mhm.
one Earth Sun distance from the star. So
Mhm.
you got the micro and the macro coming together,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
you need artists for that.
Yeah, totally. And that reminded me the other aspect I think that is always a challenge, but a fun challenge for illustrators is the time aspect. And so, like showing change. And so what, you're capturing the birth of a solar system of planets, showing how that,
Evolves.
gets to where we are today. And
That's right. I mean,
yeah.
evolution is a unifying theme in science, right? So there's evolution in biology, but there's
Uh-huh.
evolution in astronomy, how things evolve, and it's a neat thing in
Mhm.
astronomy, right? When I look out there at any given object, it's whatever age it's at, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
typically it's about 1 million years old. That's the typical age of young stars. Um,
Okay.
that we observe after they get 10 to 10 million years old, 20 million years old, they lose the material around them. They made planets by that point.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
And so
Mhm.
the formation process is on the way to ending.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So then the way we observe evolution in astronomy is, I capture that one evolutionary state in a given object, and then I got to go to another object that I know
Mm.
via some other means is either younger or
Okay.
older, and observe that
Mhm.
one and get a sample. And that's how you
Okay.
construct evolution in astronomy. And then, yes, we need to illustrate how that occurs in a direct sense when we're trying to
Uh-huh.
communicate either with each other, as in
Uh-huh.
scientists within your scientific community, but then there's
Mhm.
communicating with all astronomers, then there's communicating
Mhm.
with scientists, and then, of course, the thing we want the public to be excited about the science that we're doing as well. And
Mhm.
that to me is the ultimate thing to try, is to have that communication and let everyone else see the joy of understanding.
That's fantastic. I feel like a lot of a lot of physicists, astronomers, I don't know, lose sight of wanting to inspire other people. What drives you? Why
I, you
are
know,
you excited about
I think we all do want to inspire other people. It's just hard to do.
that? Mhm.
And so for me, I mean, I love this stuff. I mean, I'm so grateful. I'm so fortunate to be able to have the career that I have had,
Uh-huh.
to be able to do this science, uh, and break the boundaries of human knowledge. But that's the key, right? So that's what
Mhm.
drives me, is breaking the boundaries of human knowledge and then sharing that understanding, right?
Mhm.
So I tell my students, often when you get an ALMA image or a JWST spectrum, that's the first time in human history we have looked at that object in this particular way. That is
That's incredible.
uniquely
Yeah.
new in a very, and so
Mhm.
yes, we should share that, right? After all, the
Mhm.
public is funding these observatories.
Do you so along those lines, was there a I guess, did you always know that this is what you wanted to do, or was there an aha moment that inspired you when you were younger? Were
I
you one of
was
those kids that stared up at the stars and
I stared up at the stars, and I always thought I thought I wanted to be an astronomer, and or an aeronautical engineer or something like that. And so
Okay.
I was
Mhm.
set up to be an engineer, and then I got to school the first day at University Villanova University, and I saw these machines, and I was like, oh no, that's not me. The more abstract nature of astronomy, we can't
Uh-huh.
touch it, we can't feel it, but we can try to remote sense it, really appealed
Mhm.
to me. And so I shifted to astronomy, and then I found my place.
Cool. Cool.
I love that story.
Yeah.
Um, And what you were saying earlier about feeling so lucky to do what you do,
Hmm.
I think both Claire and I feel the same, that we're so lucky that we get to like learn a little bit about your life's work and the amazing work you do, and try to communicate that. So, okay, so I have another question to route us back to the science a little bit.
Hmm.
So, you're searching for, water and carbon. So, what's the point? Why is this exciting
Right.
in other solar systems?
The thing I've been working over on for the past 10 years with uh, some colleagues from
Hmm.
various other institutes, is to try to understand. So as an astrochemist, right? If you want to think about the origin of life, which is like a fundamental question, just in
Hmm.
general, right? How did it happen? So somehow we had a transition from an abiotic chemistry to some chemistry that had memory, which is biology or biochemistry.
Hmm.
Okay, and
Hmm.
how did you get there? All right. So now, as an astronomer who studies molecules, you could start to think, well, I could try to detect amino acids in space and so on. But actually, it turns out that if we look at rocks that are falling onto the planet right now, meteorites,
Uh-huh.
most primitive ones of them actually have some of the building blocks that life might have used to get
Hmm.
started, or the Earth could have made it itself. And so then
Uh-huh.
I was like, all right, so then I need to understand how that stuff got into the rocks. So, how did the
Hmm.
carbon get into the rocks? Because that's the carbon that matters. It's the carbon that's
Okay.
coming. And so um, there's two different ways to think about where things are in space. So, you could have something in the gas, all right, or it
Hmm.
could be in the solid state.
Hmm.
And the Earth is made of the solids. So I thought to myself, well, as an astronomer, can I try to understand how those solids evolve? How did carbon get implanted into those rocks? What
Hmm.
happens to it? And how does it make it to a planet? And so that's
Hmm.
the same question could be asked about water. So
Hmm.
water gets also forms in interstellar space. How does that happen? How does it get implanted into the solids and then provided to a planet? So that's ultimately our origin story from a
Uh-huh.
writ large perspective. It doesn't answer how did the Earth get from that abiotic chemistry to biology,
Hmm.
but as an astronomer, I can contribute to that big question.
So you're okay. So there's kind of a recipe for life, and you're looking to see if the ingredients
Finding the
are in these
ingredients.
planets and
Yep.
figuring out maybe get learning a little bit about how those ingredients ended up there and if we can predict like
You
where
got
else they might be. Okay.
that's right.
So what are the ingredients for life? We've got water, we've got carbon. Are there other molecules that you're looking for?
The major contributors for life on Earth are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So the CHON.
Okay.
Now,
Uh-huh.
life, of course, uses uh, a whole suite of elements. Another key one would be phosphorus. That's a big
Mhm.
component of the sugar backbone, the ribose
Mhm.
for DNA. And so you could think about tracking phosphorus as well. It's a little harder, actually, I think, because the phosphorus very readily gets into the rocks very early on. The carbon
Oh.
takes a little bit longer because it's more what we call volatile. It spends a
Mhm.
little bit more time in the gas,
Okay.
whereas the phosphorus very quickly gets into the rocks or the solids. And in interstellar space, let's be clear. Let's back up for a second,
Uh-huh.
right? So stars are born out of giant clouds of gas that is
Okay.
mostly molecular in composition, and also tiny little particulate matter that we call dust. And
Mm-hmm.
that particular matter is the solids, the silicates, the phosphorus is embedded in them. And when I say
Okay.
tiny, it's like a tenth of a micron. So it's much smaller than the width of a human hair.
Mm-hmm.
And when that collapse occurs, you make a star and it's rotating, and then you make a disk of material. And in that
Uh-huh.
disk, the solids grow a little bit, they hit each other, and they grow to bigger
Mm-hmm.
and bigger sizes, and they sink to the midplane, the center of that disk. And that's where planets are born. That's why the solar
Okay.
system has all planets all in a plane,
Uh-huh.
because they formed initially out of those solids which were gathered in the plane.
Okay. So that's why we don't have like a big sphere of planets. We get, like you
We got
said,
a,
like
a
a
plane of planets. And so you want to
uh-huh.
understand how, okay, so I make the planets in the plane. Well, first you grow to millimeter sizes, then you go to kilometer sizes, and the Earth is 6,000 kilometers in size. So
Mm-hmm.
you're getting from the story is really fascinating, right? It's something like 10 to the minus 11, 10 to the minus 13
Yeah.
kilometers, all the way up to 6,000 kilometers. I mean, it's many orders of magnitude is the story of how the planet is born. And so you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine there might be different ways to gain or lose those ingredients as you go all the way from the beginning to
Mm-hmm.
the end. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what we try to do.
And to go back to something you said earlier, I had never really thought about it in that way before, because the time spans, the lifespans of planets, solar systems is so long
Mhm.
that you can't just sit there and observe. You have, like you said, you have to basically take a picture of another solar system
Yeah.
that's at a different point in growth. So it's almost like if we took photos of 100 kids at a different ages,
Yep.
and from that tried to like figure out
Try to.
how humans grow.
You got it. It's astronomy
Yeah.
is the art of divination. We can't touch
Uh-huh.
it.
Yeah.
We can't feel it. Now we can use materials in the solar system. In some cases, we could travel there, right? We could send probes, robots. We can send
Hmm.
humans in some instances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And bring things back. But beyond the solar system, we have to use the telescopes, and we may be wildly wrong. What we are determining from this, because it's very difficult, right? But that's
Hmm.
science.
Yeah.
Science has this process where you propose an idea, it gets tested and tested and tested, and it gets revised as you go. And so
Hmm.
you put your contributions out there, and you may be right, you may be wrong, and over time we build up understanding.
I think that's so important, and something that people tend to think, oh, science is changing their mind again. But really, that's the beauty and strength of science, is
It's,
that you take new evidence and you modify and you test and
that's
you stay open to new ideas.
you have to it's a hard thing as a person, right? I could
Hmm.
spend 10 years on this one idea, working
Yeah.
really hard, and then someone will come along and write a really good paper and say that you're completely wrong, and you're like, oh man. And so you might try to push back, and so on and so forth, but you
Hmm.
have to be humble, because this is really hard. It's a
Have
hard.
you had that happen where you've had to really readjust a
Yeah,
direction in your?
of
Uh-huh.
course. Yes,
Yeah.
that's just the way it works. You have to accept that.
Uh-huh.
Okay, all right, new information has come along, and I have to shift my understanding. Okay, sometimes I have to start over,
Hmm.
and try to understand it from the bottom up again. Or it may just a clever theorist only come up with new ways of looking at things, and so I try to be a clever theorist and say, all right, well, maybe
Yeah.
just this little modification here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think what I found challenging and difficult when I did molecular biology bench work was that there's both to- totally new directions, like like because there's new understanding in something, and then there's also just kind of figuring out, well, is there something wrong with my procedure? Do I have to go back and troubleshoot that part of it? So there's a lot of layers of
Yep.
a reassessment and
I
Yeah.
think
yeah.
that's right. And so we have to rely on people that do laboratory work to
Mm-hmm.
tell us, where in the spectrum of light to look for our molecules. That's people doing that in the
Yeah.
lab or with
Mm-hmm.
theory. And the chemical interactions that are occurring in interstellar space as stars are being born, we try to mock out those conditions in the lab. And that then builds into the information that we use to try to interpret our observations. And so it's this whole thing, it builds upon geophysics, chemistry, physics, and ultimately, for me, I want to understand the connection to biology. I won't. I'll just contribute to understanding how the
Yeah.
ingredients got there and
Mm-hmm.
how likely those ingredients are being provided to other planets.
It's really interesting, just like your obvious love for the theory and how you depend on the people in the lab and the technology that's being developed, and you early on you realize that's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
um and it's just interesting because I feel like personally that's kind of my like love hate with kind of the idea of space where it's so abstract. And so it's just fascinating to hear that like that's where you find joy in it.
Yeah, you
um
live in the abstract. Yeah, the
yeah,
scales are vast, the time scales are vast, everything. So
yeah,
you just say, okay, that's what they are.
yeah.
But this is happening, right? And so then you try to relate it to our understanding of physics and chemistry,
Hmm.
geophysics. So you relate it to what we know about how this thing could evolve based upon our understanding of physics, how this
Hmm.
chemical interaction could occur based upon our understanding of chemistry, and understand what the limitations of that knowledge is. Because in some
Hmm.
cases, if I take a particular reaction that may be important, maybe we've only measured it at 300 Kelvin, that's room temperature,
Hmm.
uh, but the interactions, stars are born out of regions that are just 10 degrees above absolute zero. So that's 10 Kelvin or minus 263 degrees
Okay.
Celsius, which is somewhere around like minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So damn cold.
Yeah.
Uh, and so oftentimes the interactions haven't been measured at those temperatures and say, okay, well,
Hmm.
maybe how does that affect me? But that
Yeah.
but that's where the grounding comes from.
Yeah.
We get grounded in our knowledge of physics and chemistry here on Earth.
Yeah. And then what just thinking about what all of those questions, what that looks like as far as how you collaborate with scientists, and like what does that look like for you? Like are you calling up a chemist saying, can we try it at this temperature? Or like what does that
I
communication
have
actually look
colleagues that
like?
absolutely do that.
Cool.
And I have at time cold called people. I remember early in my career, I was interested in the interaction of X-rays and how they hit those tiny little grains that deposits energy. And is that going to throw some ices off? They'll basically sublimate into the gas. So,
Okay.
energy will break the bond. And so I
Yeah.
called him up. I was a Harvard professor, and I was like, about 4.6 billion years ago, there were abundant X rays from the young sun, and they were hitting tiny little solids. And I know you study how X rays interact with matter. And he says, my student actually is doing something directly relates to that. And so that student then helped co-write a paper about
Oh,
how
that's so
X-rays
cool.
interact with solids. And so, yes, you do these weird phone calls, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're not weird because they're to your colleagues who know the science. But
Yeah.
sometimes they're like, "This is crazy.
Yeah.
You're gonna think I'm crazy, but actually, this is kind of neat."
That's fascinating. And I feel like it's
Ye-
a conversation, a related conversation that Nicole and I have had um recently. is just, with technology, like the globalization of information and, how much easier it is to collaborate so I guess I'm curious, like, have you seen how that's affected your kind of really
Oh,
big picture thinking and what you have access to? Yeah.
oh my God, Claire. Right, so I witnessed the birth of the internet, right,
Yeah.
and lived through, so when I was a student, I had to go to the library and take photocopies
Yeah.
of everything and bring them back to my office. I would write a
Yeah.
paper type it, and then you would fax it to your colleague, and then they take a month or 2 months to send it back to you, and then it would take. But now everything's at your fingertips.
Hmm.
So if I want to find a paper, I can go online and I can find it because NASA has funded this thing called the Astronomical Data System, where basically all of our publications are accessible in a format that you can just read right now. And so, yes, everything is much quicker today. The
Hmm.
scale of science has changed. The data information rate has exploded, and the number of astronomers has not exploded,
Yeah.
right? And so, what you have to do is you have to then develop sophisticated programs to try and understand how to gather in all that information, and there's
Yeah.
astronomers that are really good at that.
Of
I'm
course.
dealing at the nitty gritty details,
Yeah.
which requires me to have access. I need to have access to the chemical literature or the geophysical literature, which I may not fully understand actually
Yeah.
based on my training, but that's where I have to reach out to my colleagues who were trained there and then cross the disciplinary boundaries to understand some of these problems that ultimately at their heart require true interdisciplinary work to try and push forward. And the origin of life really falls into that.
So that makes me, I think it's fascinating that you weren't formally trained in the chemical side of things. And,
Yes.
um, I think it relates a little bit to what Nicole and I do, how, we have formal training in some areas, but in a sense, we have to be a little think outside the box as well to visualize things. So I'm curious, like, do you think that gives you an edge as far as looking at things how a chemist might not, who is formally trained,
Yeah,
or
yes, and
asking different types of
I mean,
questions?
yes and no. I think if I had a little bit more formal training, I could get to the answer quicker, and I would have a better understanding of what's happening going on. Now, the trick is that the temperatures that these interactions are happening at are so much colder, so it limits things, and so that allows you to be somewhat self-trained. But my field, the astrochemical field, was founded by people who were either physical chemists or chemical physicists. And
Okay.
they provided the background understanding under which I was able to operate. And without them, and without those grounding contributions, I would
Yeah.
not be where I am today. And so here is an ode to those very, very strong contributions. And so that I think that's also important.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but the another way to look at this is life, if you treat it the way I do, is an educational. You're always learning, and you need to be
Mhm.
always open to learning. I mean, I like to look at my students teach me as much as I teach them because they'll show up with new ideas and new understanding and looking at something in a different way. And so I'm learning every day, and that's why I do like interdisciplinary science such as astrochemistry, because
Mhm.
it does offer me the opportunity to expand, continually expand as over my career.
So that is amazing. And thinking about students and people being excited. So, um, ultimately you're looking at the origins of life. So I'm sure there's a lot of misconceptions that people have around that as well. Are there things that you wish that people understood about, like little green aliens and
So I teach a class on the search for life elsewhere, and I
Uh-huh.
have a whole section on Little Green Men and Project Blue Book and all these
Yeah.
things where we were looking for aliens, and the likelihood it's I think it's likely that life exists elsewhere, but it's not clear how common.
Mhm.
The steps to get to life may have we may be a cosmic coincidence that things just happen the right way, but there's a
Mhm.
billion stars, a billion galaxies, each with billions of stars, and so the likelihood is that life is out there. Is intelligent life out there traveling the galaxy? And the answer to that is probably not, because we would know it already. And this is what's called the
Okay.
paradox. They, they,
Mhm.
they would be here and we would know it. Because if you look at the history of expansion on the Earth, did any of the humans that showed up, did we not know they were there?
Yeah.
You knew they were there, right?
Mhm.
Because it was sadly a tale of conquest, right? Is the history
Mhm.
of humanity, and so the same thing would nominally be true. You would expect for aliens, and so I think we would know it if they were out there. But we're now at the cusp. So we've been
Mhm.
listening to ET for a while now. It
Uh-huh.
was called SETI, right, where they've been
Mhm.
trying to see if anything's communicating with us. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You have to divine where they're going to transmit in the spectrum of light, which is an educated guess, and you could be wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, but now we're at the stage where we're actually probably going to be able, within the next 20 to 30 years, actually, it's going to start in about 4 years with the European Extremely Large Telescope. We're going to be trying to look for signatures of life in the atmosphere
Oh,
of other planets. And so the search for life is happening, will be happening right now, and we will be
wow.
alive to witness
Wow.
those initial explorations,
Wow.
which is pretty
And
cool.
is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that's more related to the search for like intelligent light, like communication signals, or
No,
no?
no. So this would be looking for passively. So on the Earth, so the atmosphere of our planet is mostly nitrogen, but it also
Okay.
has oxygen, and that oxygen came solely from life. And the ozone in our atmosphere formed from oxygen, molecular
Okay.
oxygen. Okay, so we can look for molecular oxygen or ozone in the atmospheres of other planets. And if you were to detect it, you would say that likely came from life. Now, it's a little tricky. People
Oh, I didn't
start,
realize there was such a
yeah, there's a direct correspondence. So
Okay.
the other
Okay.
thing would be methane. So
Okay.
methane is on the Earth for the most part is coming from life. Cows,
Mhm.
as an example, releasing gas. And that methane goes into the atmosphere, reacts immediately with the oxygen and makes something like CO or CO2. And the only
Mhm.
reason methane and O2 are in our atmosphere, they don't want to be there together. The atmosphere is not in equilibrium. If the atmosphere were of the Earth would be in equilibrium, those two species would not, oxygen and methane, would not exist together. And so the signature of life in our atmosphere is that the chemistry is in disequilibrium. In fact,
Oh,
chemistry of life is the chemistry of
Interesting.
disequilibrium as well,
Yeah.
right?
I never thought of it
Right.
that way before.
Me
Yeah,
neither.
and so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking out there
Mhm.
for methane and oxygen, and if we see them
Mhm.
in the atmosphere of some other planet somewhere, then you're going to write that paper that we may have found life. Now, that life is probably just microbes, right?
Mhm.
Because over the history of our planet, in fact, in terms of the mass of life on our planet, it's actually mostly microbial. All right.
Okay.
And so that is the signature of microbes in the atmosphere. It
Mhm.
doesn't tell you that intelligent life exists around those planets. But if you were to know or suspect, based upon this evidence, that life was present, then you could consider whether you would try to listen
Mhm.
to see if you could hear signs of communication from that civilization, potential civilization.
Okay.
So it's where are we at with the potential for microbial life on Mars? Is it still a toss up, or are we feeling more confident about that now?
Uh, so we don't know that life. So if life exists, if life were still present on Mars, it would have to be
Mhm.
deep down.
Mhm.
At least
Mhm.
that's where the water is
Where it's
a little bit warmer, and the water might be in
Mhm.
liquid form.
Mhm.
Um, and the only way we're going to probe that is to have humans on Mars, to get down in the gullies and deep
Okay.
down in Valles Marineris, which is the deep canyon on Mars,
Mhm.
and really try and probe deeper layers on the planet, or very, very
Mhm.
intelligent robots that somehow can go deep into those crevices and still survive and communicate.
Mhm.
Um, so the other places that I think, so there's Europa and Enceladus, that
Mhm.
we know deep have oceans buried under ice, and there's a heat source from tidal heating from Jupiter. Now, what we don't know is it water, liquid water, or is it
Mhm.
sort of slush? Uh,
Mhm.
and if it's slush, maybe that's not as good for life. Um,
Mhm.
and finally, other places, Titan, where there's lakes of liquid methane. Um,
Mhm.
another place one might consider to look for life. My gut says it's highly unlikely that life is present in those environments. However, you, as a scientist, you must keep an open mind, and the possibility could exist, and we should
Mhm.
investigate and find out, because we can.
So thank you for that summary. It's exciting to think about, even if the chances are slim. We've kept you on for quite a while, so I have kind of a silly question. I'm wondering if you like science fiction, and if so, do you have a favorite
I, I
show or book?
I do science fiction and fantasy. I love to escape the world. I really
Mhm.
love Peter Hamilton wrote books. It was the second one was what, Judas Unchained, and
I didn't know that. This is great.
the for Pandora's Star is what it is, the first one, and it's a
Okay.
story about basically discovering the presence of a solar system. So there's something called the Dyson sphere. So one
Yes.
idea how you could
That.
capture all the energy from a star. So you build a
Uh-huh.
bunch of receptors to gather energy, and so they witness the envelopment of this advanced civilization witnesses the envelopment of another star, and they wonder, how did that happen? Was it done deliberately? Was it done to them? And
Mhm.
they go there, and all hell breaks loose. And it's really, really good storytelling. I highly recommend it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, there's so many science fiction shows that I would love to ask you questions about, but we'll have to save that for another time, if we can maybe bribe you to come on another time. So, um,
And
Claire, did
then,
we have more questions before we
yeah,
wrap up?
I just have like two kind of wrap up questions. One is a fun one. Did you ever think you would have your own Wikipedia page as you went through?
And I didn't do it, right? I don't know who did it.
Yeah.
I have no idea who did it. And so I was like, huh, okay.
That's pretty that's awesome.
I saw that and I was like, that is so cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yay! That's great. Yeah, it's good.
You're a space superstar. And then one final question, which I think is just fun for, aspiring scientists and artists and anyone who is passionate about these kind of big picture things. If you could tell your 9-year-old self one thing, what would that be?
Keep dreaming, and persevere. Life is not easy. It throws things at you, and the path to success requires diligence and perseverance, and yes, lots of dedication. So,
I
I
love
love
it.
that. I
Thank
love
you.
that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much
pleasure.
for joining us today, Ted. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today and listening in. Please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment if you'd like to hear more from amazing scientists like Ted that we get to work with. And don't forget to subscribe.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.